The US involvement in Vietnam, which led to the Vietnam War, began with Truman. After World War II, Vietnam was given back to the French, who had controlled it before the war. The Vietnamese were not happy with this and revolted in North Vietnam. The country was then split in two. Starting with Truman and continuing up through Eisenhower, the US sent more and more Army advisors to help the South build an army. Eventually, there were over 700 advisors in Vietnam. When Kennedy became president, he started serious pushes for the US to stop its involvement in Vietnam. After JFK was assassinated, LBJ took over. During the first 1.5 years of his presidency, when he was just filling in the void left by JFK, he didn't do too much about Vietnam. However, once he won re-election, he started to put more and more time into Vietnam, and it would soon spiral out of control. The people of the US didn't want another war, so they started to protest. The first major protests, led by the Students for Democratic Society, or SDS, were the teach-ins. The teach-ins started in the University of Michigan. The teachers, after teaching their regular classes, were allowed to use the university grounds to teach anyone that wanted to hear about what was happening in Vietnam.
Teach their classes during the day, but in the evening at 6 o'clock, the protesters or the critics or the people who were distressed about this could have the whole university to teach anything they wanted about Vietnam, to protest, to have our speakers, to show movies, to tell whatever truths we thought we should tell, and just don't interfere with business as usual, like teaching your classes. And so when this agreement was made, it was like, instead of having a sit-in, it was called a teach-in. So students at Berkeley had their teach-in, and students in Cambridge had their teach-in, and students at Columbia had their teach-in. And pretty soon this idea of a teach-in, a forum where people could use their knowledge to criticize and examine what the government policy was, spread all over the country. There were several hundred of these. And then they teach in the group in Ann Arbor formed a committee called the Inter-University Committee for Debate on Foreign Policy. So we were debating with the authorities that said this was a good war, and our...
Even with the teach-ins, protesting didn't pick up until after the Tet Offensive. The Tet Offensive showed the American people that the U.S. was not winning the war, like everyone thought they were. Walter Cronkite is famous for saying, "I thought we were winning this war." Support of the war plummeted. There were marches across the country protesting the war. Draft cards were burned in protest of the draft. However, most Americans didn't have much to do with the protests and less to do with the war.
The only thing that you knew about was that once in a while somebody distant from you had suffered in the war, had lost a member of their family. I didn't actually do anything. I was too wrapped up in my own life, running a household with 3 little boys. But those little boys were growing up. And matter of fact, the Vietnam War was going on in 1962, and we thought, should we try again? Should we actually try again and maybe have another son who might be sent to war? That was a depressing concept.
On April 29th, 1975, the U.S. Embassy in Vietnam was evacuated by helicopter. This signaled the end of the Vietnam War. People were ecstatic over this. The Vietnam War was so despised at this point that nobody wanted to touch it ever again. Nobody thought at this point that they could ever win it, and all they wanted to do was get out. U.S. peoples were overjoyed at this.
At the end of the war, I think most everybody was delighted and relieved, even though most of us recognized that we had not won that war. That was not
actually fell, was taken over by the Viet Cong. at least in Berkeley, there was dancing in the streets. The war is over. The war is over.
The war was over. The US was finally out of Vietnam, but we paid a terrible price. Over 55,000 had died. Much of Vietnam was destroyed, and the US Treasury had been bled almost dry. All in all, it was the most unproductive, unpopular, and wasteful war in the history of the US. And even though the war is long over, we still remember those that were lost and wish things had gone differently.